Halo Combat Evolved. You know, as somebody who is currently in their early to mid 20s, I always find it fascinating how I can transport myself into the world of a game that I did not grow up with like so many others did. And today we are continuing that kind of trend with a video game franchise of which I have played almost half of the main games of, but there is another half of the main games of which I have not gotten the chance to experience. Halo Combat Evolved was the first game to dawn this franchise, and I'm here to take you all on the journey of my first experience playing through this game as I break down in this video essay why I believe that Halo Combat Evolved is a good game. Like I just said, my experience with this franchise is definitely like most others who are a part of my generation and age, where they grew up with the later portion of the games, and eventually they had to go back and experience the originals for the first time. My first experience with Halo came with Halo 4, back when I was in my early years of high school. Eventually, this transitioned into Halo 5, which for a time was the only Halo game that I played. This then transitioned into me eventually playing Halo Reach, weirdly, as the next game, and then here we are now up to date with Halo Infinite. I feel like it only makes sense that I now go back to experience the older games and complete my play of every game in the franchise, especially since I am fortunate and lucky enough to have my older brother's old Xbox One S that just so happened to have had the Master Chief Collection on it. Halo Combat Evolved was certainly an experience for me, and I think my thoughts on it are going to be a little interesting for some people, but overall I definitely agree with the general view of the game, where I believe it is a good video game and one that really kicked off one of the most iconic first-person shooter series of games in history. The best way I could describe Halo Combat Evolved is that it feels like an old-school arcade game brought into a more lived-in console version style video game. If anyone here knows the memories of which I had, where you would go into your local arcade, restaurant, bar style place where you would always have those shooter arcade games, that in a way I could see the resemblance when playing Halo Combat Evolved. One of the biggest examples that I can think of that I can relate to on my personal experience is the Terminator Salvation arcade game. I remember having that at my local place, and just the simplicity of that game is what I feel like translates so well into the simplicity of this Halo game. Halo Combat Evolved is a very old game. After all, it is from 2001, during the days of the original Xbox. Maybe this is just me, but I really did get those feelings of those style of games when you compare it over to Halo CE. I guess this is also a perfect transition into talking about the actual gameplay itself of Halo CE. I don't think it goes without saying, but I think most people would agree that the gameplay is the main focus of a game like this. I think the story tends to take more of a back seat, whereas the gameplay is full front and center, and to some degree that is not a bad thing at all. If anything, I would say that the gameplay complements the story just because of the fact that the story is so simplistic that if the story were to have been a little bit more overly complicated or overbearing, I think it would have taken away from some of the fun factors of the gameplay. I do really like that there is a sense of scale and atmosphere to the worlds and the locations of which you fight in. In particular, of course, I think the Halo exemplifies that to great lengths. When on the Halo in some of the locations you are in, it does feel like you are playing in an open world style game, even though it's not actually open world like Halo Infinite is, for example. Halo Infinite is just one giant map with multiple points to go to, but with Halo CE, it is a point A to point B gameplay loop, but it still gives off the feeling of being open world given the locations that you travel through. You can move around freely through all these different areas using many of the vehicles, and also with how each mission is designed, it also allows for maneuverability to many different places. Something I do like about what a video game can show me is its atmosphere, and recently I played the entire BioShock franchise for the first time, and the thing that that franchise excels the most in is atmosphere. For me here with this game, I thought that there was a good sense of atmosphere. Given the time in which this game takes place in the very far future, nothing of what you see can really surprise you, but at the same time it leaves such an eerie tone to some of the places that you haven't explored before that it would make sense for you, the player, to feel that way going into them, just like how you, playing as Master Chief, goes into those locations for the first time himself. I found that the game is not as simplistic as its gunplay mechanics gameplay. That's not a bad thing at all, and to some degree I find it to be good because there's nothing overly convoluted about what it is is that you're supposed to do. For pretty much about 90 to 95% of the game, it is a run and gun shoot aliens gameplay loop that honestly never gets old, even if at times it can get a little tedious. This is where those old school arcade game style feelings came into play that I keep mentioning. You always just keep moving from one location to another and shooting your enemies, and there's nothing really more to it. I can definitely see where a lot of people nowadays with the newer Halo games find the new stuff to be a little too much, if that's the best way to put it. A lot of the mechanics and gunplay of the older Halo titles, again, do rely on that more simplistic feel that doesn't feel like you have to do too much to play. With the newer games, it is definitely way bigger and more accentuated with the sliding, mantling, boosting, and other movement-based mechanics that I feel tend to make the newer games a little bit more fast-paced and, dare I say, sweatier. However, if I did have to give one gripe to the movement of these old Halo games, it is the fact that I do think that you have to at least include running. I can understand removing boosting and sliding and maybe even mantling, but for me, you do have to at least include sprinting. I think just the walking pace of your character moving feels a little too unordinary for any game to really be doing. When I'm trying to evade enemies who are chasing after me and I'm just walking away and they seem to not be able to catch me or kill me, I don't feel like there's a sense of danger there. I know the topic of movement in Halo is a contested one throughout every game, so I won't talk much more about this and end it there before I say something that's probably going to piss off some Halo game purists. I do have another gripe that I also want to mention from a gameplay perspective that I think is completely fair from my point of view because of the generation of games that I grew up with. I find that something old games like this tend to do a lot is that the way they design certain segments of maps, they can become, how do I say, super repetitive. For example, when fighting on the Covenant cruiser during each mission that follows you on a cruiser, you are being taken through pretty much every single hallway of this giant ship. And again, I get that it's important to scale how big a Covenant cruiser is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take me through every single hallway just to complete the objective. Another game that I found this to be annoying with was when I played Star Wars Republic Commando for the first time several years ago. This game came out a couple of years after Halo CE, and it follows a similar trend where they take you through these levels that all look the exact same, and they do it for so long that it just becomes super repetitive and doesn't get to the point of the objective quick enough. Like, between both games, sometimes I couldn't tell if I was on the same thing for like an hour because that's just how much it kept going. This is just something I find in old games that I feel like is done way better nowadays, where they can keep the maps tighter and not just drag you along through waves and waves of enemies in these same hallways. I'm sure some people will disagree with me on that, but I'll be curious to know your thoughts. I found all the guns to be interesting, and with the Halo universe, I think the guns are one of the coolest aspects of the franchise. I particularly like using the Magnum and found its rare usability to be interesting so that I could use every shot well without wasting. The pump shotgun particularly was super effective against all enemies, and I definitely enjoyed using that one when I got the chance. The power weapons from the rocket launcher to sniper rifle and even the flamethrower, which is mainly in multiplayer, I found to be pretty fun to use. As somebody who grew up with the Halo 4 sniper rifle, which is awful, it's so bad in every way, shape, and form, I'm glad that every other game that I've played has done way better with the sniper rifle. The Covenant guns leave something to be a little desired, I feel. I didn't find any of them particularly all that great, especially the Needler, which is, quite frankly, utter garbage. I'm really glad that they toned that gun up in other games because I'm sorry, but it is so useless here. So not a whole lot of options, but again, I can give it a pass here because this was the first game after all in the franchise. The weapons over time through each new title do get a lot better. The vehicle gameplay in this game, whenever it would be a thing, I found to be extremely clunky and honestly kind of annoying at points. I'm really glad that they stepped up this part of the gameplay as well for each new progressive title, especially with the newer ones where it feels so much more smooth. When using vehicles in this game, particularly the Ghost or a Banshee or Warthog, I found that it to be a little annoying just how clunky it actually was. Again, that's just a part of the dated qualities of this game, so I guess I can give it a pass there. Since for the context of this review, I also played the Master Chief Collection version of the game, it essentially is a more remastered version. I was able to play this game through the more upscaled graphics version with modified touches to the environment and also its lighting. Given in this version, you also get the the ability to switch back and forth between the look of the older version and the new remastered version by clicking the back button on the controller, I think that I still preferred to actually play the remastered look, but I will say it is cool that they added in this option for you to do this. I know that it's going to be sacrilegious to say for some people to hear this, but the older version to me just does not look good at all. All these years later, I can imagine back in the day that it was incredible for some people to look at it, but it's just not for me here in the year of 2024. I'm sure you probably have all heard me talk enough about the gameplay, so it's time to transition over to talking about the characters, lore, and the story of this game. Now, I do have an interesting relationship with the characters here in this game because I'll be totally honest, I don't think that there is much here to get me as interested in them as I felt like I should have been. Our boy Master Chief in particular, I found to not be as interesting simply because, again, this game features a lot of dated qualities to it. The voice acting here I think is not as strong as it is in other games based on the clips that I have seen of those other games I haven't played and through my experience having played the ones that I have. In this game, it feels like the voice actors are just saying the lines of their dialogue and they're not really giving any emotional weight to it, no matter the context. It basically is just very monotone and stiff in execution. There's just no anger, excitement, sadness, or anything like that. It's all just one note. Now, the voice of Chief is obviously iconic and I love hearing it, but overall, I thought that the badassness of this character is probably at its weakest here in this game. It's just so fun to play as him, no doubt, but I think other games probably do a much better job, and I imagine as he progresses over time with each new passing title. Captain Keyes is your generic tough guy ship captain who is brave and does the right thing. Cortana is probably as one note as it gets, but is a nice first introduction to her character and a relationship with you as Chief. We get a hint of Sergeant Johnson that doesn't really go anywhere, although he's probably the most eccentric when it comes to voice acting. The Guilty Spark Forerunner robot is maybe, in my opinion, the most interesting character because of his ability to not give you a good clue if he's a good guy or a bad guy, and his voice acting was one of the better ones, in my opinion. The story of Halo CE, I think for what it's going for and communicating, it did an effective job. The one thing that I love about all the Halo games that I have played so far is that the stories always follow this sense of wonderment and your ability to be fascinated with the unknown that is across the universe and galaxy. This idea that you as a species can discover this giant halo ring of which you know nothing about is really cool. Even the Covenant doesn't know what it is. You want to know who built it, you want to know what's inside of it, and you also want to know what it can do with its abilities, which is what the story gives to you in bits and pieces, is that the fact that it is actually a giant weapon. A weapon that could cause immense amount of destruction and death to whoever holds the power of it. In the case of the fact that you have two factions fighting against each other with the Covenant and humanity, whoever controls it will eventually kill each other with it. At the same time though, I also love that inside of this Halo, there is something else maybe even worse than the actual ring itself that could cause devastation to both sides of the conflict. That is where we get to talking about the Flood. I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for me to get to this point where I do mention this, and I have to say, I completely see where people are coming from when they talk about how terrifying this element in the story is. Parasitic alien zombies. I mean, what else can you really say? When they first show up, I can't deny they were very terrifying and I was caught off guard heavily. Although admittedly they are revealed through a cutscene that is some of the most janky and terrible looking cutscene animations I think I've ever seen, but again, it's an old game and so I can give it a pass there. Now, I had already known about what the Flood was before coming into this game, so I wasn't as surprised by it in the sense of not knowing what it was, but being in the actual presence of them when fighting them is the terrifying part. With this also comes some brutal honesty, and I have to be totally honest with everybody here, I actually, after a while, really hated every second of the Flood. To clarify my point, they are terrifying, but the actual playtime that you get when fighting off against these enemies from the later middle portion to the end of the story is some of the most annoying gameplay I have ever had the chance to experience. Remember when I said that one of this game's biggest problems is that it's repetitive and tedious with its map design? Yeah, well, that seemingly factors in with this point because I truly could not stand going through the same 50 fucking hallways and levels fighting against these enemies. It was excruciatingly painful and it felt like a chore to get through. I get that what they were going for here is that there are just so many of them that it just can't be stopped. It's just that to a point, they did become more annoying than terrifying, which is not what you want to do. Now, I played this on normal difficulty, but yet somehow it felt like I was playing it on legendary. I honestly believe that if Halo Combat Evolved had come out nowadays with how games tightly compact maneuverability difficulty and moving through levels on a map, I think that it would be a lot more terrifying and a much better experience. It's just after a while, after a couple of hours, it became so frustrating to think that I wanted any more of a reason to keep going after repeating the same damn checkpoint. I just know for a fact that whenever I say something like this, it's going to piss off a lot of the OG fans, because for them back in the day, again, I can imagine this was such an awesome experience, but truly terrifying no matter the difficulty. I guess for me, it all comes down to how something like this is executed, and I personally think it wasn't executed well because the map design made it worse of an experience. If they had shortened how long it took me to fight these things, then I think I would have liked it more. Now, the story side of who they are is of course the more fascinating aspect, because you are trying to blow up the Halo and prevent them from escaping. I think that the endgame suits it well for being fast-paced and trying to get you to the finish line. When you are on the downed and destroyed Pillar of Autumn and you need to ignite its core to blow up that portion of the ring, it is, I think, a lot of fun for a final mission. You are fighting off against both the Covenant and the Flood, and so you, the Master Chief, have everything against you, and since you are the ultimate killing machine, it feels like you have a much bigger responsibility than you would have otherwise if, say, you would have had a bigger help from the UNSC. My only gripe with the finale was that as you were trying to ride the Warthog from one end of the ship to the other to escape, they'd make you restart the entire thing if you die at the end, for example. It happened to me once, and it's things like that say I was playing this on Legendary, I think a controller would probably be going through a window in my house. You are able to get off the Halo, it explodes, and the ending is just between you and Cortana as you fly off in the presence of both the Covenant and the Flood being destroyed. Ultimately, I think at the end of the day, that's one of the main themes of the game, is that against all odds, you as a Spartan must do everything you can to protect humanity, and if you have the ability to fight all odds and fight all your enemies at once, you've got to do whatever you can. So when the success comes, it's even more satisfying. And this kind of theme is, I think, throughout all the Halo games, even the ones where Master Chief is not in them, like Halo 3 ODST or Halo Reach. It's this idea that humanity is all that matters, or that you must live to fight another day. Again, while the story, I think, is more so in the background than the gameplay, I think they did a good job to equally give both gameplay and story something fun to experience on a first playthrough. I also want to give massive credit to this game for getting me interested as much as it could into the lore of the Halo universe. One of the key components of the gameplay that I didn't mention originally was that there are several terminals throughout the game that allow you to get a deep dive into the world of the Halo, for example, and what it is about as given through exposition from the Forerunner robot, and I think they did a good enough job to get you those little subtle hints as to everything that you would expect from that thing that you're learning about or the world around it. And again, it's all done from the perspective of making you come through it into the unknown. You are totally unaware as to everything around you, and you want to be able to learn as much about it as humanly possible, because that also means that you are the character of Master Chief. Master Chief is just like the player, because he is also trying to learn everything he can so that he can complete his mission. I think the lore and the way that it is communicated through this game is a good way to not only get you invested in a story, but also the potential of what's to come in the later games, at least for me, now that I have the ability to play those later games. Back in the day, I can imagine that this particular instance is what made it for so many players, because they didn't know if there would be another Halo game, and so if one were to come, they were now as invested as ever. I think if a game studio is going to start a new franchise, this is how you should take the approach. Sometimes it is not always the gameplay that gets people interested, but sometimes it can also be what's inside of the game through its story and its lore. Gameplay is not always what's going to sell. I think Halo does a good job with all sides of the conversation, and in particular here with Halo Combat Evolved. Now, before I leave, I do want to address the multiplayer real quickly, although this is going to be a very small segment because there's not much really to speak to. The multiplayer in this game only confirmed something that I've been saying throughout the entire video. This game is more of a combat and military shooter simulator, as if I was playing an old arcade game on a console version of a video game. The multiplayer consists of smaller maps where you're fighting against the players, and it feels like a compressed arcade game, but with multiplayer. It makes it fun that way, in my opinion. I even recognized many of the maps in this game because I have played most of them remastered in other Halo games like Halo 5. So it actually made my experience playing the multiplayer a lot more fun because I had already known what those maps were like. It is so simple and to the point that there is nothing overly complicated about it. This is something many multiplayer games get wrong nowadays, is that they try to make their systems and mechanics way too complicated and not simplistic. You're not going to get players to play your game if you make things too confusing for them. If the game is simple enough, then they will keep coming back, and I think Halo CE exemplifies that to great lengths. With what they were working with back in the day, I can imagine that this was probably some of the most fun video video game experience that any person could have. If I grew up with this multiplayer back in the day, I probably would never get off of it. So that is a massive W that I can give to this mode. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is where I'm going to end off the video. If you have made it this far, I cannot wait to get started on the next game, of which is Halo 2. From everything that I hear, this is where the franchise truly kicks off, and that is no offense to Halo CE, but again, like I've heard, Halo 2 and maybe even Halo 3, which comes after it, are maybe the best games in the entire franchise, and while that remains to be seen from my perspective, it gets me even more excited now that I've played the first game going into these next few titles. Again, for anyone watching, I look forward to bringing you all along for that journey, so stay tuned for the future when I release that video. If you did all enjoy this video, and you are somebody who either likes or loves Halo Combat Evolved, give this video a like, and let's see if we can hit a goal of 100 likes for this video. If you are also new here to this channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on that notification bell to be updated for whenever I upload again in the future for Halo 2, which will be my next video. I hope everyone here has a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you all soon. This is Orion, signing out.